Have you ever stopped to consider exactly how much an empty chair in your waiting room is costing your practice? You probably even have a marketing team who's going to run a campaign to fix that problem. If your regularly scheduled day looks something like this, 8 a.m., your team comes in, the schedule is full, you're double booked for a couple appointments, but by mid-afternoon, you have six people who've no-showed, leaving providers unhappy, a team that is annoyed and frustrated. And with revenue, you're never going to be able to get back because that's time spent that you can't retrieve. If this sounds all too familiar, you're going to want to stay tuned to this episode because today we're going to dive into not only why no-shows happen, but what it's specifically costing your practice and what you can do about it. If we haven't met yet, I'm Alisa Conner, and I help both specialty medical practices and professional service organizations grow and expand their profit and revenue, not by outspending their competitors, but instead by creating patient and client experiences that others can't wait to talk about. So let's dive into this week's episode. Unfortunately, specialty medical practices end up having a lot more challenges with no-shows than other practices. And there's several reasons for this. And you may have heard some of these reasons previously, but stick with me because it's always a good reminder to be aware of why things are happening and specifically why they're happening for your practice. The first is extended lead times. Now, sometimes you can't help having an extended lead time depending on how busy your docs are. And so that is a reason that is not always in your control, but it is definitely a reason that no-shows happen. Because if someone books an appointment and then they have to wait 2, 3, 4 or more weeks before that appointment, the longer they have to wait, the more likely the no-show is to happen, especially if there aren't follow-ups or engagement with that patient during that long wait time. So there are ways to mitigate it. However, the longer they have to wait to see a doc, the more likely they're going to pick up the phone and try to find someone else that can see them sooner. That's just the nature of the beast. The second reason that people no-show is fear and avoidance. Depending on what kind of specialty practice they're going into, they may have fear around the procedure or about the diagnosis or about the treatment plan. And so they may just decide, I don't want to show up because I can't conquer my fear of whatever it might be. And so they just don't show up. The other undiscussed part of this is that a lot of times patients that have fear around or anxiety around a diagnosis or the treatment plan is that they haven't been well educated about what that means. They're reading WebMD and getting the answers that probably aren't true or helpful to them specifically. And so there are also ways to mitigate this risk. The third reason that patients no-show is transportation and distance. So they may not have transportation to your office, or their transportation might fall through, or they just can't get off work or get a ride from work, or the distance from work is too far to get to your office. So it can be any number of things, but transportation and distance is a reality when it comes to people missing their appointment. And then last but not least, everyone's favorite, no one's favorite, is financial strain. Now, because most specialty practice services are not in network or not covered fully by insurance, this can deter people from moving forward with just even a basic appointment. They're worried that they're not going to be able to cover costs. They don't know what things are going to cost. And so they start to make up stories in their mind before they even get to you. But this gives you an opportunity to have conversations with your patients or even before their patients to help mitigate those concerns before they ever get to your office. We will, those can be conversations like, we'll work with you, or we have payment plans, or we are going to walk through every step of what this is going to look like financially for you to help mitigate that. Most practices are not having those conversations until people walk through the door and have their first appointment. But you can be losing people or having people not show up because you're not addressing those things at the forefront. Nobody likes to talk about money. I know it's hard to be specific when you don't know people's exact insurance, but you can have general conversations that put people more at ease and increase the likelihood that they'll show up. A lot of practices just assume that no-shows occur because people are flaky or they don't want to show up or they change their mind at the last minute. But that isn't always the case. And no amount of reminders or texts or follow-up is going to help you if you have a disengaged patient. Now, the disengaged patient doesn't necessarily always happen before an appointment. It can happen at three different points along the patient journey. And if you aren't actually nurturing and caring for that patient at each of those intersections of that journey, your chance of no-shows increases substantially. That can look like the patient who no-shows for a consult, but it can also look like the patient who ghosts their follow-up call or stops treatment. Each of those different intersections of the patient journey offers an opportunity for patients to just stop showing up. But they didn't just stop showing up at that moment in time. They stopped showing up long before those moments in time because something happened along the way that made them feel uncomfortable or unnoticed or a number in your practice. So if your practice is struggling with no-shows, unless you address those specific points on your journey, every single one of those 3 points along the journey for your patients, you're going to continue to struggle with no-shows, which leads us to the second part of this episode, which is everyone's favorite. Let's do some practice math. Now, when we talk about practice math, the numbers that we're going to put into the equation are not necessarily the same numbers that you're going to have for your practice. So always feel free to pull your numbers if you have them. That's something we're going to go over in the 3-part action plan at the end of this episode. Let's start with some statistics. So the first statistic I found was that the average no-show rate for practices is around 23% in the United States. Practices range from 5 to 50% depending on the specialty, but we're just going to use 23% because that is smack dab in the middle. And then the other statistic we're going to use in our math is that industry estimates put the average patient cost at around $200 for a no-show visit. This may be higher or lower in your practice, but that's something that you can go and pull your specifics around what those numbers are. But we're going to use $200 for our equation. So if your practice just has 3 no-shows a day per provider and you have 4 providers in your office, that's 12 no-shows per day. If we multiply that by the $200, that's $2,400 a day. So if we take that $2,400 a day and then we multiply it by 250 clinic days a year, that puts us at around $600,000 a year per practice. And that is very much on the low end of things. Typically, practices charge much more than $200 a visit, depending on the specialty. And also, the number of no-shows could be higher for your office too. But that's a very good starting point. That's over $500,000 a year that you are just watching walk out the waiting room or not show up in the waiting room in this case. That's $600,000 a year that essentially is revenue that your practice is never going to see. Keep that number in mind as we move through the episode, and then you'll have an opportunity to calculate your number at the end of the episode. So let's dive into some areas where you're losing patients that you may not even know that is where you're losing them. And the first is with follow-up. Now, oftentimes advice is send out text messages and follow up with email and send appointment reminders. Well, most of those reminders are very generic. And the biggest downfall of sending those reminders is that everybody does it. So when somebody is getting reminders constantly from everybody and their brother, they just have a tendency to swipe and delete or swipe and block, which really is not going to help you get people in your office for their appointment. So the first thing you need to do is figure out how people like to be communicated with. And if you're not asking that question, and if you are asking and then not abiding by their choices, then you are going to have a problem with communication. And so those generic text messages that go out and say, click yes or no to confirm your appointment, either get ignored, get deleted, or not only get deleted and ignored, but your number gets blocked, which means you're never getting through again. That can be a huge challenge, especially if that person's like, I don't want to be contacted this way. And a lot of this is going to depend on the age of the patient. If you have a millennial or younger that is a patient, they never want you to call them ever. They don't check their voicemail. They don't like to talk on the phone. And so text may be the best way to reach them. If you have a Gen Z patient, do not email them. They never check their email. I know I have three of them. I look at their email accounts and cringe. They literally have 20,000 emails they've never opened. Email does not exist to them. They don't have it on their phone. And unless it has to do with their job, they're not looking at it. So if you're emailing them appointment reminders or sending them email reminders, chances are pretty high you're never going to get a hold of them. So knowing your patients and then abiding by their specific request on how to be communicated to is really, really important. Now, I say this because oftentimes I've gone to, I'll use my dentist as an example, and they'll ask for all of your information, but they never have once asked how to best reach me. And so I get a text message, I get a phone call on my text or on my cell phone, and I get a phone call on the home number that nobody has the number to. That is so annoying because now I'm getting called 3 times about an appointment that I never asked for reminders in any of those ways. So it's really important to not over communicate with people who don't want you to be texting, for example, and using their data, or that never check their email. So before you go and send reminders, because that's what's convenient for you, you need to find out the preferences of your patients and then abide by those preferences. The next solution that's often recommended is charging patients for no-shows. And this can work. I'm not saying it can't work, but it can also turn around and bite you in the behind. And that is because if a patient, especially if they're a new patient, is charged for a no-show appointment, chances are pretty high they're going to say, I'm not going back there. And they're going to go directly to your competitor, especially if that competitor isn't charging for no-show appointments. So yes, it can be helpful. Does it build the patient experience? Absolutely not. It is actually going to do the opposite. And the chance that that person that gets charged a no-show fee of referring you to someone else is slim to none. And that is one of the best ways to grow your practice. And I have several episodes where I talk about referral marketing. I can link those in the description below. So charging patients for no-shows is a no-go in my book. The next is reaching out with verbal reminders, and that is a phone call or voicemail or whatever that might look like, because most people don't answer their phone. And this could work if they answer their phone and listen to their voicemail. But like I just mentioned, there are certain generations that don't do either of those things. But it also isn't solving the no-show problem if it exists prior to them coming to their appointment. These are all options for people at the last minute. And that isn't necessarily where people drop off when it comes to no-show rates. People assume that they're not showing up because they didn't get enough reminders or nobody told them or they forgot. But when we look at the whole patient journey, we realize that they dropped off long before any of those reminders were ever sent, scheduled, or recorded. The other place where no-shows can happen is the rescheduling roadblock. And this is a biggie because life happens. There are reasons people can't show up. There are car accidents. There are kids that get sick. There's a million different reasons why someone can't show up for their appointment. But if they are in a position where they have to call back to reschedule and they're put on hold, or they go online and they're asked for 19 pieces of information that they've already given you in order to get an appointment time, chances are pretty high they're either going to forget, walk away, hang up, and just for some reason or another, never make the appointment. When you pair that with your competitor down the street who has not only online scheduling that they can go on and book their own appointment, but they have two-way text rescheduling, who do you think they're going to pick? You or the PE-backed corporation down the street? Chances are pretty high they're going to pick the other guy because they're making their life much easier. Now, I'm not saying that to scare you or to threaten you. I'm telling you that because in order to compete, you have to meet them where they are. And if you aren't doing that, you're going to continue to lose people not only to no-shows, but to referrals and to many other leaks that I diagnose for practices regularly. So what is it that you can do about no-shows? This is where we dive into your 3-step weekly action plan. Number 1, you probably already guessed it, is to pull your numbers and to calculate your no-show rate and what it's costing your practice. The simple math for that is the number of no-shows per day multiplied by the amount that an average patient that no-shows costs your practice times the number of days that you're in the clinic per year. That's going to give you a general number. You can write that down. And the nice thing about having that number is you have a starting place. You can take that to your leadership team, and then they have a benchmark of where to start to solve the problem, and also can identify exactly how big of a problem it is for your practice. The second thing you can do is audit your current messaging. Are you sending out text reminders that are generic and don't have any appointment information, or that just say, click yes or no? And also, when you're doing the audit, seeing how many people actually respond to those messages. Because if it's at 1%, you probably have a problem. And if you are sending generic messaging for everything you do, chances are pretty high you're getting ignored. So see what the messaging looks like, and if there's a way that you can make it more personalized and get more response from the people that you're sending text messages to or emails or whatever it might be. And also, it wouldn't hurt to measure which of the ways that you're communicating is the most effective. And last of all, your third action step is to call your office at around 12:30 and see how long it takes to get a hold of someone. How long are you on hold? How long does it take to make an appointment? How long is the entire process? And how frustrated do you get trying to make that phone call? Now, if you're somebody that if you called the front desk and they knew it was going to be you, then you probably want to find someone outside of your practice to do this last third step and then record exactly what happens, because that recording is going to be gold for your office and help you determine what needs to be fixed and how it needs to be fixed. Now, this is not a blame game action stack for your front desk team, because they are only going to be as successful as you have empowered them to be through education and training and through processes and also through technology. So don't bash the guy at the front desk if this is not a smooth process. It's just a learning experience for your entire organization to learn how to more effectively get people not only scheduled, but to follow up with those people so that you don't have as many no-shows. Here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to tell you to send another reminder. You've already been told that, and if it was working, you wouldn't be here listening to this. What I am going to do is tell you what I am hearing from practices is they don't want to sit in another lecture or another seminar telling them that these leaks exist. What they want is someone to handhold them in a way that helps their exact practice fix these leaks. So that's exactly what I'm building. I'm taking a very small number of specialty practices, and we're going to build a HIPAA compliant, not only text follow-up system, but multiple avenues to stay in touch with patients, help them schedule, and also meet patients where they are to ensure that the patient journey is smooth and keeps them engaged along their entire time with your practice. If you want to find out whether or not your practice would be a good fit for this very small founding member program, I would love to schedule a call with you. The link to that triage call is below in the show notes, and the program is only going to have space for 10 specialty practices. I'm keeping it small very specifically so that everyone gets a hands-on experience, but also so that I can ensure that when we're building out this program together, everything is included that needs to be included to ensure that your practice is successful and the other practices in the program are successful. So I would love for you to join me. If you're interested, click the button below. Let's hop on a phone call for 15 or 20 minutes. And not only are we going to talk about the program and whether or not it would be a mutual good fit, but we're going to calculate your referral leak numbers and your no-show numbers on that call. So either way, you're walking away with value. In the meantime, I appreciate you for tuning in this week. If you found value in this episode and it made you think about things in a little bit different way, I would love for you to share it with someone else who would also get value in it. Thanks so much for tuning in every week. I'll see you again next week. In the meantime, take care, be well, stay safe. See you soon.